I want to spend a few minutes and talk about how undesirable results result from meaningful, well, apparently meaningful actions, and it's entitled Swamping Insights, but it doesn't really actually have anything to do with the swamp. It has to do with how actions in one part of a process can in fact swamp another part of a process. And this is an outgrowth of a really marvelous article about why and how small system dynamics models can help policymakers. And there's a link to this paper in the wiki page, and I really recommend that you read it. It's a really good paper. So that the model that I want to talk about that we've developed from what was in that paper is there is in fact a group of people who are responsible for providing temporary assistance to families um, as they attempt to find them work, and there's a capacity for them to support families, and the load on the system is dependent upon how many families are needing support in response to the capacity available, and that has an influence on the time it takes to find the first job. And if I now go ahead and run this model to give you a sense of what the initial situation looks like, over time the number of families on temporary assistance is in fact continuing to increase, which is of great concern to the individuals responsible for providing temporary assistance, because it obviously makes them look bad. And the number of families on temporary assistance is growing, even though the number of families entering temporary assistance on a month-to-month basis is essentially a constant. So the group figures that because their ability to help these families and to find work is dependent upon their capacity, the most appropriate response is probably to improve the capacity of the group itself to support these families on temporary assistance. So if I increase this by 10% and then look at what happens, because it takes some time for that increased capacity to come into play, you can see that it doesn't in fact have an improving effect on the number of families in temporary assistance, though over time the situation actually gets worse than it was before we improved the capacity. So that the normal response on the part of those involved is to figure that they haven't improved the capacity enough. So they'll go ahead and say, let's improve the capacity some more and see how this plays out. So when we run the model again, we'll notice that, well, yes, as we've increased the capacity, it does in fact have a much greater impact in the short term, though in the longer term it actually gets worse. So some insightful person then says, well, maybe we're not looking at the whole problem. So as it turns out, this is one stage of a multi-stage process, so that when individuals actually or families actually migrate from here and a job is found, they enter another state where they're still receiving assistance while they're in the process of migrating to mainstream employment, and this is a responsibility of some other group, and the ability of this group to support those people is also dependent upon their capacity, and the individuals from this queue migrate to mainstream employment, though some of them in fact migrate back to families on temporary assistance, and the rate at which they migrate back is dependent upon the extent to which this organization is in fact loaded. So what happens from doing this, if we start back at the beginning again and rerun this model and look at the situation, we'll notice that while the total number of families being served is increasing, the families on temporary assistance is increasing, and the employed after temporary assistance is leveling out. Though when we in fact increase the capacity of the first part of this system and look at what happens, we'll notice that as the second part increases, the the situation in this segment, the second segment of the process, actually gets worse. And if you look at the flows, it is in fact causing flows to go back from the second part back to the first part of the process. So what's happening is that by improving the capacity of this part of the process, it's overloading the second part of the process, and in fact causing more and more families to return to the first part of the process as opposed to migrate to mainstream employment. So that rather than improve this part of the model or the process, if they in fact improve the second stage of the process, what they find is that there is a substantial improvement in both dimensions of the process, because it's actually ended up reducing the amount that have returned to the upstream part of the process, so that everything levels out and comes down to a relatively steady state. The reason that organizations and processes run into these kinds of problems is because the families that are served are in fact served in different segments of the process by different groups with different responsibilities, and most of the time they're not talking to each other, so that each one of them is trying to solve their own problems, and in the process of trying to solve their own problems, they make the overall situation worse. And what would be even worse in this particular situation, that if the initial value for the individual or the families employed after temporary assistance, if that had been a certain value, what would have happened is that the result would have been, oh, sorry, I need to take this off and run it again, so that there isn't an increase in the capacity and the initial steady state. What happens is everything is steady, so that because nothing is changing, people probably don't sense that there's any problem at all, even though there are in fact a large number of families in each segment of this process. So things that aren't getting worse usually don't get any attention, even when they should. And when things do change so they get our attention, we often look at the wrong portion of the process and have a tendency to act in the wrong ways. The underlying part of this is that based upon the environment that we function in and our goals, we in fact take action to change that environment. And what we seldom realize is that there are in fact side effects of those actions, and those side effects change the environment, which in fact can have an effect on our goals themselves. And at the same time that this is happening, there are in fact other people which have different goals, and they are attempting to alter the environment at the same time that we're attempting to alter the environment. And their actions are in fact also creating side effects which have an effect on the environment, which are likely to have an impact on their goals. So, and far too often what we do is we myopically look at situations as though this is all that's involved. It's our goals and the environment and our actions to change the environment, and we don't pay attention to the other aspects that come into play, and as a consequence, our actions are often unlikely to produce the goals that we're actually looking for. So, hope you found this interesting, and we'll see you in the next video.